Okay, folks, welcome to Delaware and welcome to a meeting of the Atlantic Area Management Board. We have three tasks at hand today. One, set the quota period for the 2026 Area 1A fishery. We are also going to consider approval of the FMP review and state compliance for the 2024 fishing year. And we're going to elect our vice chair, excuse me. My name's Doug Grout. I'm chair for the moment. And before we go on, Tony needs to make an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to let everybody know that Scott Curatolo Wageman is online, John Maniscalco, and Melanie Griffin for commissioners.
Okay, thank you, Tony. We also have, we have in our documents an agenda. Are there any changes that people would like to make to the agenda? Seeing none, is there any objection to the agenda? Seeing none, it's approved by unanimous consent. We also have the proceedings from the May 2025 meeting. Are there any comments, edits? And are there any objections to approving the minutes? Seeing none, that is approved by unanimous consent too. So we're now down to setting our quota period for 2000. Oh, one more thing I forgot. This is an opportunity we have right now for public comment on Atlantic herring for items that are not on the agenda. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak to something that is not on the Atlantic herring agenda? Is there anybody online? Okay, now we'll move on to setting the quota period for 2026 Area 1A fishery. And Emily is going to give a brief presentation on this.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on the next slide, I'll just go over first the potential quota for Area 1A for 2026. There's two different possibilities for next year. And then I will review the FMP details on the quota periods for Area 1A, and the board action for consideration today is to set the quota periods for the 2026 Area 1A fishery. So as far as the quota for next year, just a little bit of background. So this board did approve a set of revised specifications for Atlantic herring for all of the areas back in May, and these were specifications as recommended by the New England Fishery Management Council, and the board approved those specifications contingent on a final rule being published by NOAA Fisheries. So in June, NOAA did issue a proposed rule for those specifications. However, the final rule has not yet been implemented, and the timeline is TBD. We do not know when those specifications will be implemented. So far, these specifications for 2026 are not in place. So if NOAA Fisheries does publish that final rule in time for next year's season, then the sub ACL for Area 1A would be 2,640 metric tons. However, if the final rule is not implemented in time for next year's fishery, then the current year specifications, so the 2025 specifications, would roll over to be the 2026 specifications. That is per the federal FMP. So in that case, the sub ACL would be 783 metric tons. So there are two quota scenarios. Again, we don't have any details on the timeline for implementation of those specifications. So then as far as how the quota periods work for Area 1A, just as a reminder, per Amendment 3 to the Interstate FMP, these quota periods shall be determined annually by the board for Area 1A. So the board can distribute the Area 1A sub-ACL to meet the needs of the fishery across the year using, there's a couple options for different types of quota periods. There's the bi-monthly, the trimester, or the seasonal quota periods. The board can also decide whether any quota from January 1st to May 31st should instead be allocated to June 1st or later. And the board would also specify whether any underages from one period would be rolled into the next period. So up on the screen, I know it's a lot of tables, but Amendment 3 outlines all of the options for these quota periods. So it's important to note that these percentages are fixed. The only way we can change these percentages would be through an addendum. So at the top of the screen, that's the bi-monthly option where the quota is allocated to 2-month periods throughout the year. And there are also separate options if you would like no landings prior to June 1st. So there's the first option if you want to include the first part of the year. And then the second two options are no landings before June 1st. And then at the bottom on the left is the trimester option where you have 3 quota periods throughout the year. And then at the bottom on the right are the seasonal quota periods. Again, you have an option for landings before June and then options for no landings before June. So what's happened in the last few years? So back in 2019, the board decided to go with bi-monthly quota periods for Area 1A with no landings prior to June 1st. And the underages were rolled into the next period. And then for the last 6 years, the board has opted to go with the seasonal quota period approach with no landings prior to June 1st and underages rolled into the next period. So that is all I have in terms of background. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Emily? Okay, seeing no questions, we do need to set a season. Megan Ware.
Thanks. Yeah, I had sent staff a motion to set the season, so I'll let that get brought up. So obviously a really frustrating situation on the herring specs. I hope that resolves itself soon. I think regardless, I would support continuing to use the same season split we've used recently. So move to implement seasonal distribution of quota for the 2026 Area 1A sub-ACL with 72.8% available from June through September and 27.2% allocated from October through December with no landings prior to June 1. Underages will be rolled over into the next quota period. The fishery will close when 92% of the seasonal period's quota is projected to be caught.
Renee Zobel seconding it. Megan, would you like to provide rationale?
Just obviously still working under very low quotas. There's not a lot of room to move here. So I think keeping what we've been doing has worked as best as we can.
Renee is seconder. Do you have Ray Kane?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan, do you think we should include in this motion something about the rollover from Canada with the ware fishery up there? You know, it doesn't happen until what, the middle of October, but something be in this motion. Should it be mentioned?
Megan.
My understanding is that's a federal process, unfortunately, for us right now with the federal government shutdown. So I don't think that's something the commission has control over. That's going through Garfield.
Rob with Chance.
Yeah, just a quick question, Megan. Is the 92%, is that current practice? Thank you.
Any other questions? Jeff Kalen.
I just wanted to speak in support of the motion, Mr. Chairman. No questions.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other comments from the board? Seeing none, I'm going to try this the easy way first. Is there any objection to this motion? Seeing no objection, is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you very much. This will also give us time, since there's not going to be any landings before June, that if we come up with a situation where we have to adjust what we approved back in May for a quota, that we can make that adjustment at the spring meeting or even the winter meeting if we find that out. Okay, next item is approval of the FMP review and state compliance.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. So on the next slide, I'll just briefly go over the main points of our FMP review, including a couple of recommendations from the plan review team. And again, the board is considering approving the FMP review compliance reports and one de minimis request for 2024. So just a reminder, as far as the FMP, we have complementary management plans between the commission and the New England Fishery Management Council. As far as the interstate FMP, we are operating under Amendment 3, as well as its addenda, Addendum 1, which further specifies the Days Out program for Area 1A, and Addendum 2, which further specifies the Gulf of Maine spawning closures. So on the next slide, as far as the status of the stock, we are currently under a rebuilding plan that's at the federal level. And as far as stock assessments, the last stock assessment to provide an update on stock status, that was the 2024 management track assessment conducted by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. It found the stock was overfished, but not experiencing overfishing. And one of the things it noted, as well as previous assessments has noted, is the poor recruitment for the stock for the past several years and the difficulty of identifying, a particular mechanism that's really driving that low recruitment. There was a research track assessment earlier this year. It was peer reviewed in March 2025. Notably, that transitioned the stock to the WAM model. So I think we'll have a presentation to the board on that benchmark at one of the upcoming meetings. And then, as you may recall, the research track assessments through NOAA do not provide stock status. So the next assessment that will provide stock status relative to the reference points will be a management track assessment that is scheduled for this coming year in 2026. So on the next slide, this is Atlantic herring landings. US landings are in orange and Canadian landings are in that kind of darker red. Over time, and you can see, as was mentioned during the last agenda item, we are really in a low quota situation here for the past several years. Landings have really dropped off as those quotas have decreased quite a bit in the recent years. So on the next, this slide, perfect. These are preliminary 2024 landings from NOAA Fisheries Quota Monitoring. So you can see the landings are listed by area. That first column, you see the sub ACL for each area, the landings, and then the last column is the approximate percent of that sub ACL that's been caught. At the bottom, you can see overall last year across all areas, about 51% of the sub ACL was harvested, primarily from areas 1A and area 3. And that's about 22 million-ish pounds. So as far as sort of comparing to recent years, landings in 2023 and 2024 were more than double 21 and 22. Now we're now at about 22 million pounds as compared to about 10 or 11 million pounds in 21 and 22. So, we're still in this very low quota situation. Maine and Massachusetts do typically account for more than 90% of landings. And it is important to note that some vessels do land herring outside of their home port state. So on the next slide, the PRT typically discusses every year. We also get updates from the fixed gear fishery. Obviously, most of the landings are coming from the mobile gear, but we do get updates from Maine where there is a small portion of landings from fixed gear, and fixed gear does get a 30 metric ton set aside in area 1A. Maine noted that last year in 2024, there was low fixed gear harvest, but this was due to some overlap with other species near shore. So particularly menhaden arrived a little bit early last year, and that sort of impeded the transit of Atlantic herring into those fixed gears, those stop seines. However, despite those low landings, the past few years, these fixed gear harvesters in Maine waters have consistently reported adult herring returning to Maine waters in early spring. So as far as comments, the PRT finds that all states have regulations in place that meet the requirements of the FMP. New York is requesting de minimis, and they do meet that requirements. The average of the last 3 years of commercial landings are less than 1% of the coastwide total for that period. New York has had de minimis status for quite a while. And then on the next slide, the PRT had a couple of recommendations for the board to consider. So first, a short-term recommendation is for the board to discuss long-term funding solutions for the Maine DMR portside sampling program. And I'll let Maine speak to this after the presentation in detail. But essentially, funding is needed for to collect biological samples out of state. These are really important to inform the spawning closures for Area 1A and overall for the entire coast for the stock assessment. So a medium-term recommendation from the PRT is for the TC to at some point review the Area 1A spawning closure protocol to determine if there's any concerns with the prolonged periods we've had of insufficient samples and using the default closure date. So essentially, in recent years, there haven't been enough samples to forecast a closure date. So we've been using the default closure dates in the FMP. So the PRT recommends the TC discuss this. The board has noted this should not be a short-term priority because we're working with such low quotas. But at some point, the PRT recommends the TC discuss this. And then finally, the last recommendation is the next time the board does a management action for the board to also look at the definition of fixed gear in the FMP. Right now, fixed gear is only defined as stop seines and fish weirs only, but there are other gears being used like pound nets and gill nets. And just sort of for context, I mentioned there was the low fixed gear harvest in Maine last year. However, this year, the Maine fixed gear harvest was quite a bit higher, and they actually used the entire fixed gear set aside by summertime. So just something we'll need to continue to monitor closely. So we'll take a look at this definition in the future. But that's it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for Megan? I mean, Emily, sorry. Yes, Ray.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emily, you spoke about the Maine DMR. What about an observer program in Massachusetts? Because those vessels fish in Area 4, which is George's Bank. They fish it in the spring primarily, and they catch their quota. What's the coverage there? I would like to know that we've got coverage defining Atlantic sea herring and river herring.
Thanks, Ray. And as far as observer coverage, I can't really speak to the specifics. I know NOAA Fisheries has noted in the past, especially during COVID, there were some challenges with observer coverage, but that would be a question for federal staff once they return on sort of what the specifics are for Area 3 observer coverage.
Follow up, Ray?
Yes, please. Thank you. So we're looking for funding for Maine DMR for a dockside program. How about Massachusetts?
So I think, and I'll let Megan speak to this, but I think typically Maine DMR has been able to collect and process the samples for multiple states. Massachusetts DMF staff definitely assist with that sample collection and coordination, but I think a lot of the program for samples is run by Maine DMR.
Thank you.
Megan?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit about that. Yeah, Maine has been doing the herring samples basically coastwide for all the states. It was originally an ACCSP grant. We've graduated from that and been trying to hang on with some funds, but at this point, the funds are out. We, in November 2024, amended our herring disaster spend plan to include some funds for this. That was almost 2 years ago, and we still have not gotten approval of that herring spend plan. So really frustrating situation there. In the absence of that, we don't have any funds, so we can carry on for just the main portion of the herring sampling, but we don't have funds to send staff up and down the coast right now. So I think what would be a good step is maybe I can ask Emily to coordinate a call of the administrative commissioners or any other commissioners that want to join to start talking about other options. I know at one point we talked about states collecting their own samples, sending them to Maine for processing. I think that's an option. Otherwise, it's states kind of taking that on themselves, but definitely something we need to figure out because we are out of ACCSP funds at this point.
Emily?
And I believe the amount is about $25,000 per year.
Yeah, it's a really low amount. I think in our herring amended spend plan, we had tried to ask for 2 or 3 years of funding. So that's obviously not that much. Just a little background on that. We had a provision in our original herring disaster spend plan that said if someone's undergoing litigation regarding their herring harvest. We would basically hold their portion of the disaster funds until that litigation was complete. We had that happen. The result of the litigation basically said that person was no longer eligible based on our criteria for their portion of the funds. So we have an individual's funds that we are trying to reallocate, and we were going to use some of that for herring port sampling and then distribute the rest to the herring harvesters, but we have not been able to get that approved.
Nicole?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Megan, is the majority of the portion for that funding just due to staff traveling to the other states? So if the other states were able to continue the sampling and send the samples to Maine, would you still be able to do the processing and aging without funding?
Yeah, that's correct. It's mostly travel costs at this point. We can do the processing if folks are sending us stuff.
Further questions about this? Okay, we need a motion to approve the FMP review and a de minimis request from New York. Go ahead, Jeff Kalen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve the Atlantic Herring FMP review for the 2024 fishing year, state compliance reports, and de minimis requests for New York.
Any seconds, Matt Gates? Any would you like to provide any rationale for this?
It's the end of the meeting, and let's get it over with. No, it speaks for itself, Mr. Chairman, I think.
Does anybody have any comments on this? Is there any objection to this motion? Okay, motion is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you very much. Next agenda item is to elect a vice chair. Megan Ware.
I would like to nominate Eric Reed as vice chair.
Ray Kane will second that nomination. Do you have any objection to that, Eric Reed? Are there any objections to having Eric Reed as your next vice chair? Seeing none, it is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you very much, Eric. We'll start calling you Mr. Chairman again soon. Okay, only other thing is other business. Any other business that people would like to bring up? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn. So moved. Thank you very much for an efficient meeting.